I am from Rwanda.
India, Italy, England, Ethiopia, India, England, Italy, Germany,
France,
Ireland.
My father is Pakistani, but my mother is American.
So I am a first generation Indian American who was born and raised in Rochester, New York, by two of the most selfless and loving people. My parents met in India when they matched up at the same medical school. They supported each other through medical school. They studied together. They took classes together. And they were the first ones in their family to go to college and earn advanced degrees. Another really great tidbit is that they were the first people in their family to not abide by having an arranged marriage. So they met in med school, they fell in love, and they got married. They believed in finding their own love and destiny and knew that something that powerful could only be determined by them and not their parents. So I always love that about my parents because all their siblings had arranged marriages, but they did not. And they just followed their hearts, and here I am.
Aww, I love that. Okay. What brought your family to the United States?
So from my parents' perspective, they eventually married in India in 1974, and they made the bold and brave decision to leave all their family behind and immigrate as permanent residents to the United States. So 47 years ago, they packed up everything that they had, everything that they owned, put it into as many suitcases as they had, along with their savings, which was $16. So my dad brought $8 and my mom brought her $8, and they immigrated to the US with $16 in their pocket to pursue their dreams and desires and discover the land of fortune and opportunity together. They had dreams of furthering their medical education in the United States and doing that together and acquiring specialist training. So in order to do that, they needed to pass their national boards for residency and fellowship in their respective fields. So they went from, they left India and they started their journey in Detroit, Michigan. They were there for 3 years. And after that, they moved to Rochester, New York. They bought their first home, which is my childhood home, which is where they still live. And they set up their own private practices in gastroenterology and radiology.
My father is Pakistani, but my mother is American or Caucasian. And they met when they were in university. So my father had come here on a scholarship to the University of Minnesota. And he met my mother, and they got married and went back to Pakistan. And I was actually born in Pakistan, and then I came here when I was 9 months old and grew up here until I was about 7, 8 actually. And then we moved back. My parents got divorced. We moved back to Pakistan, and I grew up with my dad for about 10 years and then came here. So it's a little, weird. I don't know if I'm first generation or an immigrant, but I think more so people would see me as an immigrant than a first gen.
So basically, I am from Rwanda in Africa. And how did I get in here? So I finished my bachelor's degree in Rwanda and then went to South Africa to get something that is similar to master's degree. We called it postgraduate program. And from there, I met an SU professor in physics who was at my university there to give a talk. And I liked the talk she was giving and the research she was giving. And we were actually like 5 or 6 kids who were interested. So we asked her, how can we join the university, the research? She told us the requirements, the things we have to study, and the exam we have to take. And then because we have to take a GRE, and then we went over the process, applied to Syracuse University, took the exam, and then they picked me. And then that is how I ended up coming here to Syracuse.
From both sides of my family actually are mostly from Ireland. And it was my great-grandparents who immigrated over here back in like the early 1900s. So the one we know the most about is my dad's grandmother. Her name was Bridget McVeigh, and she came over here in 1909 or something. She was 17 years old, came over here by herself. She had like a whole big family in Ireland. They're actually, all of them are still over there. Came here by herself, met to New York City. She met my great-grandfather, and they actually were neighbors in Ireland, but didn't really know each other, and they met in New York City and got married, and so we kind of, that's like our big like main origin story that we know about the most. And then I have some family from a little bit from Italy that we know, so we've met some of them before, but we have less information about that. So my great-grandmother was part of a very large Irish family, and they were pretty poor. And we actually just found out recently, my dad and mom went to visit my dad's extended family in Ireland, and they found out that there was this aunt who was technically my great-great-grandfather's mother, but he was raised by his grandparents because she had him out of wedlock like back in the 1800s. And so she was already in the US, but we never knew her or like her future descendants. And so then this, family that was my great-grandmother's was pretty poor. There were a lot of them, and she actually helped send money over to send a few of what were her grandchildren over to the US. So she sent the money for my great-grandmother to be able to come over to New York, because you had to have like a sponsor in that time. And then my whole family is from the New York City area, so they kind of all stayed there.
My origin of my immigration story is very simple. So I wanted to say is that I was born in Taiwan. So it's a beautiful island, but I always wanted to look for something bigger, something more. So when I graduated from college, I had a chance to work in Singapore for 3 years, and then so from there I found a job that I can travel around the world. So I have been, experience the world. And eventually I found somebody who is in America. So I got my citizenship through marriage. And so it's never been easy in terms of having my citizenship, but the origin itself is really simple. I get it through my What brought me to United States? I think I had an experience when I was in college. I did a 1 semester exchange student program in the UNT in Texas, in a small town called Benton. My first impression about America is about the HBO that I watched, right? The HBO movies, and then that's the extent of my American culture. And so I was very excited, even though my parents and my brother, I have 2 younger brothers, they all think, oh, you're crazy, because they show me the Jigsaw horrified movie, and they say you're going to a very suburb of United States. Are you going to be okay? And so they are very worried about me. But I am ready to fly. I mean, I'm ready to just experience whatever, when I first touched down, I just like the, even the air smells different. I don't know if you have this experience, but I'm not exaggerating. I'm very happy that I make that connection. I made so many friends. I met a lot of international students. Now my best friend, I met two best friends. They're from Japan, and so we still keep in touch. And they visit me later on in Taiwan, and I visit them in Japan, and they visit me in Singapore when I work in Singapore. So those friendship is something, I guess that something that keep me going on, and I choose to stay here obviously because I found somebody that is my husband. He is also an immigrant himself. He is from Bulgaria. His story is much more much more complicated than I do. It's very hard for them to have a citizenship. So I guess I met someone that I really want to spend life with, and then so I decided. Also, America has so much to offer. I like the education here. I have seen other versions of education. I have been growing up with more like a memorization, more, like sitting down and then don't move your body, that kind of environment. And when I first come here, I feel like, learning is actually, you learn from, because you wanted to learn, like you found the motivation that you learn. It's not because you have a test, right? So of course, American education also have that part, right? You guys have APs and stuff, but our exam is like, I would say is a lot of teenagers, they become so sad because those one entrance exam decides whether they are going for the next 4 years, and it's never been easy for them. Because for that 2 days of exam, it kind of decide whether you're going to a good school or you're going to, going to a very bad school. So that 2 days is like the hardest part, and then you were working so hard for your 4 years in high school. So I gone through that, and I also be able to experience the exchange student program in here. So I really appreciate how people could be so free to speak up what they think. I think the critical thinking are something that really strike me as the best that you can offer to a student. So that's something that I think that make me stay.
So my father's family immigrated many years ago. So my mom used to joke that like his family came when the Pilgrims came, and that was like kind of a thing with them. They would like joke back and forth about that. So I don't really know a lot about my dad's side of the family. My mom's side of the family, that was the story I heard the most. So it's one generation different, but my mom's experience as a kid was radically different than mine. She grew up on Newell Street down in Syracuse City, and she's Italian and Irish, and her mother is 100% Italian from Florence, and my great-grandmother, my mom's mom, was first generation here in Syracuse, and same on my grandfather's side. His parents were first generation. I know that the Irish and the Italians, those two sides, they came for a better life. It was small town Florence and small town, I think it's called Naas in Ireland, and both just the families were struggling and they wanted a better life. The Italian side came with, I think it was parents and many children, and my grandfather's side, the Irish side, came just the parents and then had children here, and it was that idea that things were going to somehow be better here.
So it's a love story. I met the person who would become my wife when I was in military service in France in 1996, and She came several times to France to visit me during my military service, and I took several leaves of absence to meet her in the United States. And actually, during my second leave of absence, we decided we would get married. And we had mostly corresponded by that time through letters after we initially met. And if you're married, you gotta live together. And so at the end of my military service, I came to the United States and decided to stay here permanently. I was not deployed. Military service was at the time mandatory in France for all males above 18 and above 22 if you went to college. I had just graduated from college, so I was decided to become a military officer, and when I met her, I was still in the military academy. I will just mention that I traveled a lot when I was younger, starting in 7th grade. I would spend summers in England, in Germany, to learn foreign languages. And so the idea of one day living abroad or working abroad or being immersed in a different culture was quite familiar to me, and I was willing to embrace it. And I always thought that in my future I would travel and work elsewhere than in France. I always knew I would. So I never had a moment of hesitation when I met this woman and that we decided to marry and come and live here.
I'm from Bristol, England, United Kingdom. My story kind of begins with going to college. We went to University of Liverpool, and the program that I was in was American Studies. And part of that program was to spend a year abroad in the United States. So my first kind of experience of coming to the United States was for a year, and I went to SUNY Potsdam. I came back a couple of years later and lived in Albany to kind of. I came here for love originally, so I had met a young lady from the US, and I came back. I was on a fiancé visa originally.
So I am a first generation, well no I'm not, I am an immigrant. So my kids are first generation Americans, but I am an immigrant. So my immigrant story is, I'm originally from the United Kingdom, and it'll be 20 years this summer that I moved and have lived in the United States. So my husband and I were both bored in our jobs, and he saw a job in New York City, and I didn't think he'd get it, but I was like, yeah, apply for it. I love New York City because I'd visited there before and I had a friend living there. So I was like, yeah, go for it. And then he got an interview, and then he got the job. So it's like, oh, okay, we're moving to the US.
My family's originally from Italy.
Okay.
I'm not first, second, or third generation, but it still has a huge impact on my life and what traditions my family keep. My great-great-great-grandfather was a engineer, and he came here for a job in Utica. My great-grandmother actually did all of the calculations and math for my great-grandfather, who's the engineer.
The origin of my immigration story starts in Romania, where my family originates from. My dad was born there, and so was my mom, and they each wanted to live a better life since a lot of communism was going around there, and they each moved to America. And they both moved to Las Vegas, where they each met a friend, and that friend introduced them. And, one thing led to another, and here I am.
Let's see. Since I came to US, I've lived in Syracuse, except that I visit a lot of places, and I don't think I've encountered particular challenges because I was an immigrant. Let's see. I personally was, I don't know if I can call it a challenge. When coming from Africa and Rwanda, there are things you come here and you find very different, like a culture shock. I don't know if that's going to be one of your questions, but that was the first part. For example, I'm going to give you an example, and don't laugh. So in Rwanda, we don't have, for example, we're starting to have them now, but we used to not have fast food restaurants, right? And when I came to Syracuse, all my friends, they wanted us to go to have lunch together almost every day. And because I didn't know how to order things from fast food, like, oh wow, they were asking me, what kind of bread do you want? What is that? What kind of, okay, so what kind of toppings do you want? What kind of, oh, so many things. And I was telling my friends, oh my God, I hate ordering lunch because it's like I'm being in an interrogation. Like they're asking me so many things, and some of the stuff I don't know. Oh, yeah, you're gonna have like, do you want wheat bread? Do you want Italian something? Do you want American cheese? All of those things were. It's a tiny challenges compared to many people, but it wasn't a pleasant, like a couple of first weeks when I got here. Something with the weather. So I don't know. So that can be a challenge coming from a country where the weather is tropical. So every day in Rwanda, the weather is like maybe 75 degrees, something like that. And then you come here where sometimes it's like below 0 or it's 5. That was a big, and in Syracuse it's actually colder more than it is warmer. So that was a big challenge for me. But I don't think I have experienced, at least consciously, where people like were considering me as others. There is us and there is others. And the reason is simple, because I have only been in the circles of my friends and people who know me, people who are pretty progressive. Maybe if I have immersed in things that involve like a different kind of people, I will have experienced something like that.
So from my parents' perspective, they faced, what they've told me is that they faced very little discrimination when they came to the US 47 years ago. They were seen as qualified professionals who were desperately needed in their specialized fields of medicine. So I remember them saying that they were always welcomed with open arms, and they received numerous breaks in their career to advance themselves. And they're just very outgoing, happy, jovial people. So as when we were growing up, my sister and I always remember my parents having friends over to the house for dinner parties, and their friendship circle was so diverse. And I really loved seeing that. They were friends with everybody. They never hesitated to meet new people, to learn about their cultures, their food, their language, and they were just always open to learning from other people. So, and I can see how, I can see how that might be very, like they could be shy in situations like that. I know I would be, but they just opened up their doors and they're like, anybody come over, let's get to know each other. Let's, learn about each other. And again, this is, 47 years ago. So people today can't even do that. So I'm just glad that was modeled in my home and throughout my life.
Yeah. What brought me particularly was that I felt really strongly that there was no real future for me in Pakistan. Education was not great at the university level, and I wanted to leave. Of course, even though I was born in Pakistan, I was born an American citizen because of my mother. So it was, easy enough for me to apply to college here and come here. I know my father faced tremendous difficulty. He was a lawyer in Pakistan. And when he came here, it was very difficult for him. And he started the only thing that really he was able to do, he worked at a gas station, and then he started an import-export shop, and then tried to run a sports shop, but it was very, very difficult, and we were quite poor. In terms of whether or not he or we were discriminated against, I don't remember it as a child. I do remember as an adult being very much othered. I like to tell the story. It was when I was teaching in North Atlanta High School. When I was hired, the principal was white, and he saw me as a minority, colored, whatever, like a not white person. And then subsequently we had an African American principal who called me white. And so it was really, really odd for me, like, what am I, who am I, right? And then I remember, when 9/11 happened, my husband and I were taking a walk in the neighborhood, and some guy approached us from the other side and says, "What's up, Taliban?" And, it's like, what are you talking about? And so it seems so minor, and in a way it is very minor, but when that does happen to you, you remember it, and it becomes, something that you just think about a lot. And then when I was teaching at another school, I was accused of being a potential terrorist, somebody was unhappy with what I said in class. The parent called me and said, "How do I know you're not going to come to school with a bomb strapped around your waist?" It was very just odd. And my reaction is so odd too, because I don't know how to react in those situations. So, instead of calling her out on what she said, I couldn't even process it. And instead I said, "Well, I understand how you feel." My husband, who's from India, was called a sand N-word. And so there are all these very minor things in the grand scheme of it, right? There's no overt discrimination. You can't go here because you are. But the minute things impact you also.
I don't know as much details because it's a few generations ago, but I know for a while it was pretty tough because she was just a single woman in the United States, and that was a long time ago, so it was a lot harder to be just a young single woman in those days. But she ended up eventually coming kind of through and like working for political campaigns, and was like this huge part of the women's democratic like society or something in Westchester County. They moved out of New York City and into Westchester County, and she like ended up kind of becoming in charge of that movement. But I think part of that resulted from some like challenging situations when she had first moved here when she was younger.
Yes, I have that experience that I have been othered. Because my appearance, I'm just, I'm different. And secondly is because my names, if you know my name outside of school, my first name is not Lily, my first name is Lingzi, so you learned Chinese before, so like we have the pinyin, which is very hard for foreigners to pronounce, so we always change our name to become Lily, but my original name is different from others. So I know people are not doesn't know if they're doing this maybe unconsciously, right? Sometimes you jump to conclusion where they're from and how they should behave, and so I have some experience of that. And in terms of trying to get a job, I think my name is also suggesting that I am, I'm not from here. So certain job they are looking for, like you have the resume for them, they might not recruit you just because your name are different. So I do have that experience, and it's challenging, but I think because I have that experience, and then I also wanted people to, I also tell them myself, like if some people that have different names and then have they look different, try not to jump onto conclusion is something that I remind myself to.
No, I've been very privileged to have not had that experience, and I'm also very aware of not having that experience. That that's the difference, and I think something my mom wanted to raise my brothers and my awareness about is that she did have that, and it was very important to her that we treated others with equality and kindness and respect, and she would empathize with the kind of development of racism and prejudice in this country, because when you experience that as a kid, you tend to, have a place in your heart for how difficult and hard that can be. So even though, it doesn't sound like much now, I know that shaped her as a kid, and it definitely informed how she raised us. So I did not have that experience now. So my mom remembers getting chased around the neighborhood and made fun of because she was Italian. And my grandfather's Irish family actually disowned him because he married an Italian woman, my grandmother. So there was a lot of talk about that when I was growing up, just about how that felt for my mom and how difficult that was. Just how she wanted to move forward in a really different way, in the way that she was raising me and my brother. So that was just constantly a story I had heard. And it was just crazy to me because I was born in 1975, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And a lot of people, I grew up here in central New York, a lot of people that I knew were, had Irish and Italian history, or heritage, excuse me. So the idea of that being, just such a source of something where she was literally chased around and made fun of just one generation prior, it was I remember being surprised by that. Even now, it's just different than our experiences now.
And there are some stark differences, but at the core there are also some strong similarities. They're both secular cultures. Probably France is a little more secular than the United States. So the idea of religion was, as a mainstream in culture, was pretty new to me and a little odd. I had grown accustomed to thinking of religion as something of the past. And here it was still very much in the present. But, both the United States and France are very individualistic cultures. They're both democracies. They're both capitalist economies. France might be a little more on the social side of things. I studied for free in France, like most French students. It's not the case here. I never had to worry about my health care. It's not the case here. And so there are differences, but overall, when I think of it, I grew up watching American movies, watching American TV, listening to American music. And so when I came here, I felt like I was in very familiar territory, and I recognized things, and it was not that hard to embrace American culture for me.
Okay, thank you.
As an immigrant, you asked me what was difficult for me. One thing that was difficult is to be in America with a foreign accent. And I still encounter biases against immigrants because, if I don't open my mouth, you can't tell, but as soon as I start speaking, I can see that there is a bias against immigrants, sometimes more than others. Mostly it leads to somewhat superficial relationships with the natives, the Americans. When you're a foreigner, you are, at least in central New York, it feels like you are somewhat isolated, particularly if your culture does not provide you with a diaspora like other groups might. The French immigrate in very small numbers, and therefore they don't congregate like other groups might. They don't seek each other's support. Once again, they're a very individualistic culture, so it's very isolating to emigrate, and it's further compounded by the fact that you might have an accent.
I really didn't. My immigration experience was largely by the book. As a native English speaker, that provided me a lot of latitude. Coming from the UK, also made things a lot easier. Being white also made things a lot easier. So I had a lot of privilege in terms of being able to come over here and follow the rules that were laid out. You know, I was able to also afford the fees that were involved in kind of paying for the applications. So I didn't really face any difficulties at all.
Definitely had challenges, and challenges that I didn't think I would have. So when we first moved here 20 years ago, the only cell phones you could get were on a contract. You couldn't just go into a store and buy one and pay as you go. They were all contract phones. And I went to get a cell phone, and nobody would give me a cell phone because I didn't have a credit history. And that was just one example of how frustrating things were, because beforehand, when I lived in the UK, I had a credit history, I had a job, I had a phone, I had a credit card, and then I moved here and it was like all of a sudden I was a baby. Like, I had zero credit history, and I remember crying in the bank on a really hot sunny day in the middle of New York City. It was like over 100, and I went to see the bank and I said, I can't get a cell phone and I've been told I need a credit history. How do I get a credit history? And they said, well, you need a credit card. I'm like, okay, give me a credit card. And they were like, well, no, you can't have a credit card because you don't have a job. And it was like this chicken and egg, and I couldn't, when we first moved, because we moved with my husband's job, I was not able to work initially, so I didn't have a job. I wasn't allowed to get a job, so then I couldn't have a credit card, so then I couldn't build a credit history, and it felt very overwhelming. So that was one of my big challenges. We were on a temporary visa called a J1 and a J2, and then after 3 years, when we went to reapply, they told us that they wouldn't extend our visa and that we had to go for a different type of visa. So my husband then got the H1B visa, and as his spouse, I was an H4, but as an H4, it meant I was legally allowed to be in the US, but I was not allowed to work. So it took a very long time for us to get our green cards. So I think it was 9 years I wasn't able to work. So it was very, very challenging because I'm a professional person. I have a master's degree and I was all about my career. And I never thought that that would happen. And maybe if I had known that I would face like a challenge like that, if someone had said, by moving to the US, you won't be able to work for 9 years, I would have said, no. Currently facing another challenge. I'm an only child and my parents are getting older, and we're trying to get them to move out here because I'm now a US citizen, so they can be a dependent of me. I filled in all the immigration forms, I filed them, and then the pandemic hit and everything went on pause. About 2 months ago, I got a pre-approval for them, but the embassy in London, the US embassy, is still closed and they would need to go there for an interview. And now all the paperwork that I filed has expired because of it. So I don't know whether you can sense the theme, but in the last 20 years, there've been lots of, for me, silly challenges, but silly's the wrong word. They've really impacted me and been quite stressful. They've been bureaucratic. Let's say that. They've been very bureaucratic. And as for othering, I guess I'm lucky because I'm white, and a lot of Americans, for some reason, like the English and think we have a great accent. I haven't felt othered negatively. Sometimes people will copy my accent, and sometimes I find it funny, sometimes I find it really annoying. But most of the time, any kind of othering has been more positive, like a genuine curiosity. Oh, you're from England, that's so cool, where are you from? And that happens more in Syracuse. When I lived in New York City, nobody cared that I was English, nobody cared where I was from. and I actually lived in a very Hispanic neighborhood, so I then was the other. And I have great stories when my kids were born because they were blue-eyed and they had white blonde hair. I used to get a lot of my neighbors come up to me and pinch my baby's cheeks and say how beautiful they were and like they look like angels.
Is a derogatory term used for Italians who came to Ellis Island, and it was called WAP, means without papers, and it would get stamped on the Italians' hands. And after that, it became like, oh, those are WAP jobs, meaning, you know, low income for Italians. It was just a very derogatory term, and I think that was one of the main challenges that my family faced.
So my parents have maintained their Indian identity and heritage all these years, even though they've been, you know, in the country for 47 years, even though they've been married for 48 years. They celebrate every Indian festival. They participate in various Indian programs at the Indian Community Center and the Hindu Temple of Rochester, for which they're founding members of in Rochester, New York. But at the same time, they celebrate all the American holidays, including Christmas. So they respect and maintain both their American and Indian identities equally. Even though they've been in this country for so long, they have never, ever forgotten where they have come from. And, you know, Rochester has a very large Indian community that my parents quickly became a part of and have remained a part of all these years. It's a community filled with so many wonderful people, and you know, we grew up calling them aunties and uncles. They would always come over, and they would be, you know, second parents for my sister and me. So I just remember my childhood home being filled with Indian music and Indian food and closets of Indian clothes and numerous trips to India to visit grandparents. And my parents, they had this beautiful temple set up in their home. They taught us about the Hindu culture. They enrolled us in Hindi classes every Sunday, which I really did not like at the time, but I wish I had paid more attention to it then. But it was important for my parents that my sister and I always be connected to our Indian culture, even though both my sister and I were born in Rochester, New York, and but they never wanted us to forget where we came from, just like my parents have never forgotten where they came from. So in a way, we've been connected with our Indian culture our whole lives, whether it was learning Hindu prayers that we say when we're feeling low or sad or scared. I still say those prayers today. My mom taught me a prayer on the drive to school in second grade when I was 7 years old, and she would drop me to school, and we would have I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes in the car together, and that's what she taught me. She taught me this verse, and I still say it every single day, actually. So being connected to the Indian culture, whether it was through prayers, whether it was participating in monthly worship ceremonies, watching Bollywood movies, learning how to cook Indian food, and I didn't appreciate the importance then, but I certainly appreciate it now, and I'm more than happy to share my Indian culture with my own children who are biracial. So they get, they learn all about the Indian festivals. Like Diwali is kind of equivalent to Christmas, and so we celebrate Diwali in our household the way that we are comfortable doing so, and then we also go out and cut down Christmas trees and have presents and stockings. So I want my children to have both, to know the Indian culture just as well as I know it. I don't want it to just die with me. So that's important to me. It was important to my parents. It's important to me, and I hope it's important to my children.
Yeah, so I listen to Rwandan music almost every day, or I try to stay in touch with what is going on in my country. I've been to some like Rwandan performances in New York City. I attend not Rwanda. So Rwanda and Burundi are almost similar countries. We have almost the same culture. And in Syracuse, I have many friends from Burundi, not Rwanda. So I tend to stay in touch with them. They invite me to their weddings and other traditional stuff where I can remember about my culture. I every year, so I don't know if you guys know this, but there was a genocide in Rwanda. So every year I attend commemorations. Usually they happen in DC or Maryland, those kind of stuff. But this year and last year I didn't because of the pandemic. So basically I try to stay engaged with the Rwandan community or my friends in Rwanda. I am on WhatsApp. I don't know if you know what WhatsApp is. Yeah. So I am on different groups where I talk to people and they tell me what is going on. And has there been a generational difference? So this is a funny story. So 3 years ago I went back to Rwanda. I don't know if that is going to answer your question. If it doesn't, you can ask me again. So 3 years ago I went to Rwanda, and because of US and Rwanda are very different culturally, everything. So for example, you cannot, if you're going to church, even though I don't practice religion anymore, but I used to, you cannot go to church wearing jeans. People say, oh, what is going on? It's the same thing in many jobs, you have to have a different type of attire. So churches in Rwanda are the same thing. So when I went to Rwanda, I went to church with my friends, and in the US, 75% of the time I'm wearing jeans. I probably don't wear jeans when I'm at here, but everywhere else I wear jeans. So I went to church in jeans. So people start telling me, oh, Kazaji, why are you like that? Why do you disrespect our church now? Is that what it is? Is that how it is to live in the US? So that was a shock. And also, wearing shorts. You see how when it is hot in summer, you can wear shorts and go wherever you want. In Rwanda, it is considered disrespect. You wear shorts in your house, you don't go to somebody's place in shorts. So and when you live in a country where that is the norm, and then you go to another country, a lot of people still don't get it. To me, that is what I mean, a generational gap, because I came here. And now things that are happening in Rwanda, it's not what I left there. So it's different because it's like I'm using the American way of living. That is one way.
Definitely generational differences. My dad, so we're Muslim, and when we were living in Minnesota, there was a mosque. We lived in Mankato, and there was a mosque in Minneapolis. There wasn't one in Mankato. And I remember on Eid, which is the holiday after the month of Ramadan, he would wake us up at 4 a.m. so we could drive all the way to Minneapolis so we would be able to do the Eid prayers. And, he would, teach us every Sunday, and he would very intentionally try to expose us. When I had my kids, I also wanted to expose them. And, but after living in the States for so long, it kind of dies down. You go with the flow. You don't necessarily do as many intentional things. I'm sure other people are different, but so I tried the best I could, but it's I didn't really send them to any schools or do anything like that. I also had an incredibly hard time teaching them my language. So neither one of my girls can speak Urdu. And they know a little bit about their culture, but not a tremendous amount. So I think about that, because now when they, have their kids, it'll probably be far removed. And I can imagine 5-6, generations down, what we'll have is food and holidays, like most other people. And that's okay. That's okay with me. I think
my grandparents were not big on celebrating culture. It was much more quiet. So I imagine that it was a lot harder for my great-grandparents and then my grandparents, because they were kind of in that mindset of trying to assimilate and trying to fit in with everyone. And now we're much more, we do I learned how to Irish dance when I was little, and my whole family does big celebrations for St. Patrick's Day, and then my mom's side of the family, the Italian side, we do a lot of similar things, like make big Italian dinners and like go kind of wild with that stuff. So there's definitely more festivity now than there.
Well, every holiday we all get together and it's a big, loud party, and our culture is really centered on food mostly. So it's, we all have our special food that we love making, and we all bring it, and there's so much food, and we all talk around the table and converse with each other, and we try every Sunday to all get together for family dinner, which is usually around like 2 or 3 o'clock, which is early for most people, but for us, dinner is the biggest meal of the day, and we typically eat like a smaller breakfast or like no lunch, so then our dinner is the biggest meal and we have everyone together for it. Not really, but since COVID happened, it has been a whole lot harder because I have great-grandparents who are 96 years old and they're healthy, but of course there's still that risk that they could get sick. So we're really cautious with them, and we have some health issues in the family, so we have to be cautious of that too. But we really try, just as our immediate family members, just to keep everything going.
Okay. My celebration of my holidays is interesting because maybe what I have my job is a Chinese teacher, so I celebrate with my students. I want them to know all the wonderful holidays that we celebrate in China. So I try to bring the cultural part while we are working on the language part. So, and in terms of my family, we have three then. We have a Bulgarian, we have Chinese, we have American. That's so much holidays. Every day can be a holiday. But we celebrate Chinese New Year is a big one. We celebrate Alphabet Day, which is from some day in May. It is from Bulgaria, so that's the Bulgarian holiday that we celebrate. And the difficulty of celebrating that holiday is that if you are not physically in that culture, like you're not in China, you're not in Bulgaria, you couldn't, you're not feeling the same. And I'm thinking my kids, no matter how much stories that I tell them about the legendaries of the Nian story, why we celebrate Chinese New Year, why do we have a Moon Festival, all those legendary stories, it's story for them, but I don't think that they will be able to pass on this when I have grandkids. So it's something that you have to be present in that culture in a bigger group, then you will truly understand how people celebrate. Right now I'm just like, oh, we have hot pot for Chinese New Year. We're trying to that all the community know that how we celebrate and how important it is. For Chinese, it's all about families. There's no real religions in the holidays. It's always about traditions, about families and eating together. So those type of community sense is something that is very crucial for these holidays. So I at least I wanted them to know that whatever we do, it is kind of difficult, but they had both cultures, and then they will figure out. They choose whatever that they're comfortable with, and then if they want to learn Chinese, they can. They have to actually, because my parents don't speak English. So if they wanted to know grandparents, they will have to. Bulgaria, I don't know, because not much. I can't speak Bulgarian. I just a little bit of Bulgarian, and the grandma is in the West, so it's gonna be hard for them to keep up with the Bulgarian language.
I think because my mom's mother was the one who was 100% Italian, my mom kind of really pulled the warmth and the food and the culture and the traditions of that with her. So I, growing up, even though I'm like a range of heritage, I really felt kind of mostly Italian. My comfort foods were Italian foods. When I was little, we would go over to my grandmother's and it was like big, loud family parties. Just lots of warmth and love and, you know, like sarcasm and joking and, you know, everything was out on the table. It wasn't a family that was like hush hush. It was very, just, you know, that experience of kind of what you think of sometimes when you think of that like close Italian family getting together for meals and holidays and traditions.
I don't know that I do still. As I said, you know, culture to a great extent is steeped in religion and other traditions. I guess so. I'm not being religious. I'm not you know inclined to do something like that. But I guess I continue to love the French language, and I do that through teaching the French language and initiating young students to French literature when I teach French literature, for which I have a deep, you know, love. And I continue to read French media and watch French news when I can. Keep the pulse on what's going on there. So that's pretty much what I do to stay afloat. There are parts of my culture that I will never leave behind. Like the way I dress, I pay attention to the way I dress. I would never go normcore, which is a sacrilege in France. Wearing sweatpants and sneakers is just, or t-shirts and baseball hats. It's just not in French culture, so I'm not going there. But there are things I lost completely touch with. I don't know famous actors in France. I don't know TV personas. I don't know. I haven't stayed current on French music. So there are parts that I'm losing track of.
So I've been here 21 years, and I think over that period of time it's become more easier to kind of celebrate and embrace kind of things from back home. So when I first came over, I used to have to buy a phone card in order to be able to call my family back in England, and I used to have to buy like prepaid phone cards. Now I can just use my iPhone and FaceTime my mum whenever I want for free. It doesn't cost anything. It used to cost like $2 a minute to be able to speak to my family back home. In the same way, one of the kind of cultural norms, like with most things, is kind of food and drink. And I remember when I was first over here, any opportunity where I saw something that was from England, whether it was a candy bar.
Some of our family traditions, since Romania is a pretty big religious country, we are really big with Easter and Christmas. So for Christmas, we make a lot of sweets, a lot of pastries, we bake a lot, have like a big feast. We also cook a lot for Easter, and we do Easter egg hunts, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it's been tough, and it continues, because as I say, I really want my parents here, and they really want to be here, and I haven't seen them. Again, some of it's immigration, some of it's pandemic, but I haven't seen my parents in 2 years, and I miss them dearly. My father's had a stroke in that time. I had very serious surgery over Christmas, major surgery, and my parents wanted to come and look after me. That's a flip. But my mom was like, I'm gonna jump on a plane and come. I'm like, you can't. So we do celebrate little things. So always do Pancake Day, which is Shrove Tuesday. We call it Pancake Day. Day after Christmas is Boxing Day. Sometimes the things aren't necessarily big celebrations, but so Boxing Day, there's nothing different, but we're like, oh, it's Boxing Day today. food is probably the most the thing that I cling on to the most. So we'll eat fairly Englishy food, I guess. Like I like making shepherd's pie or a rhubarb crumble. And for certain things, over time, I guess, things have lessened. Like in England, you always have a turkey on Christmas Day, and it's probably the last 5 years we've shifted over to like prime rib instead. But it's like, oh, but I think on the flip side, like because my kids were born and raised here, I'm very conscious that I have to celebrate American holidays as well, because I want them to fit in at school and in life, and I don't want them growing up saying, oh well, we never did that because my parents are English. So we always have Thanksgiving, and for us it has often been a bit more of a Friendsgiving. Like it will be our direct family of 4, but because none of our other extended family celebrates it or lives here, we've tended to pad it out with friends. So we'll go visit friends or they'll come visit us. Now I am a US citizen. I've been a citizen for a year and a half. No, nearly 2.5 years. Now I'm a citizen. I can relax. That's what it means to me. I mean, I'm very privileged. I haven't come from a war-torn country. I didn't come here seeking asylum. And the challenges I've had with visas over the years, that now I'm finally a citizen, I'm like, good, I can work. When I come back, when I do travel and come back into the country, I'm welcomed. In the past, I've been detained for about 4 hours in a back room where people have gone through my details. So yeah, I feel I can relax. That's what it means to me. This last year, it's meant some troubling things to me as well. Sometimes, especially since when Trump was president, it didn't feel necessarily good to be an American. It doesn't feel good to be American with all the racial issues, the guns. I loathe guns. I come from a country where we don't have guns. I mean, there are guns, but like even the police, unless they're a particular tactical force, our regular policemen don't have guns. And the gun violence is something I can't wrap my head around. And it's getting to a point where it's making me angry. Like at first I just tried to avoid it, but right now it's making me really angry. Because we keep saying thoughts and prayers and how tragic this is, and yet it keeps continuing. So parts of that, I don't like that side of being an American. I can't pick all the good things about being an American and then say, oh, well, I'm an American, but I don't want this. Like it's all one package, but there are some things that I don't like.
Okay, now that is actually very maybe complicated because I'm not American yet. So even though I live here legally, I'm an immigrant, but I don't have citizenship yet. But maybe one day I'm gonna do. But I have a lot of friends who are Americans, and I try my best to be a good citizen. So not good. I have never been in trouble since I came here, even though I can tell that it's very intense to live in the US, especially when you are a black man. And that is a difference between a black man living in Rwanda and a black man living in the US. But when you're trying to be an outstanding citizen and you follow the law and you live in a state that is liberal, well, as I said, you don't have a lot of people who are jerks. So it's easier that way.
Going back to, this is like based on my parents' story. So they became proud American citizens after their permanent residency ended, which was I think around 1980. But they have both contributed significantly to their Indian and American communities and have always seen themselves as Americans of Indian heritage. And they celebrate the love for both countries every chance that they get. celebrate India's Independence Day. We're out seeing fireworks on July 4th. They have just kept it. They have kept their Indian identity very close to their heart. And so, if it weren't for my parents to, who I describe as fearless, to take this insane leap of faith 47 years ago, I'd be living a very, very different life that I do now. So I'm just forever grateful for everything that they have given to me, everything they have taught me, and everything that they have bestowed upon me. I mean, I owe everything that I am today to them, and I can't tell them that enough. So we just have very wonderful, enriched lives because my parents took the $16 and immigrated to the United States. So I'm sure that was very scary for them, and but it's something that they wanted to do, and they didn't let that fear stop them from following their dreams. So I couldn't be more grateful.
I think, like most people think, being an American to me means that you're buying into and believing in those values that America was founded on, that this is a place that can be a place for everybody, and that we're going to follow the rule of law. And the rule of law in our case consists of intentional civil and human rights provided for all people. And so I that to me makes me an American. It is also true, though, that I try to, when I'm conceiving of myself, people who look at me will always say I'm from somewhere else, I'm different because I look different. I don't feel different as an American, especially as, I partly grew up here. But I know that I'm seen as different. So in a way, I kind of become different because I'm being called different. So, I sometimes struggle with how to deal with that. Who do I project to people? Do I project myself as Pakistani? Do I project myself as American? Why does there have to be a difference with that? When I was a lot younger, I really resisted any of those labels. Belonging to any country at all, and I would call myself, I'm a citizen of the world, right? I really kind of bought into that whole idea, but the labels are hard to resist. You have to contend with them.
I think it means that we're part of a country that has historically had a lot of power and stands for freedom theoretically, and so I think that means that we have to try to do our best to, make sure that everyone is able to have access to the things that they need, and everyone feels comfortable and confident with who they are to be able to express themselves and live the best life that they possibly can. And what's the second part?
How does your immigrant identity coexist?
I think I tend to kind of separate them in moments a little bit, depending on, what I'm doing or who I'm talking with. Even just a lot of those more Irish and Italian specific things come out when I'm with my family or specifically having some sort of celebratory moment. Whereas I identify much more as an American or a member of the United States most of the time in my life.
Speaking of identity, it's having an identity is always been a problem of being a Taiwanese. If you learn from your history, Chinese, people always think Taiwanese are Chinese, right? Are you Chinese or Taiwanese? What is Taiwanese then? So because the political issues, Taiwan is not, considered a country from China. From China parts, they think, Taiwan is part of China. So yes, our ancestors are coming from China, but we have our own president, we have our own parties. We're a self-governed country. But for China, we are part of them, and we are so small. We are just an island. We won't be able to survive with ourselves, just claiming that we are Taiwanese and we are not part of Taiwan, part of China. That's too hard for economically speaking. So we has been like in terms of identity, it's always hard for me. Like when I travel to China, people will ask me, are you Chinese? And I will think about it. And I really are studying. I don't know how to answer that question. So it depends on who asks me. If a Chinese asks me, I will say Taiwanese. And then they will say, Taiwanese? Aren't you Chinese? So we'll go on this conversation for a while. I know when I first came here and then I say Taiwanese, then some of the Texan, like people from Texas, they don't know where Taiwan is. So they will think, oh, is it Thailand? Is it Taiwan? So I'm not going on that conversation, but identity is a hard part for me. And right now is very difficult for us too, because we were, the Taiwan is sitting in between U.S. and China's rivalries right now. So, these two big countries, they're trying to fight over who has who, right? Is it U.S. is going to protect Taiwan, and what is China going to do? So they have one China policy. So if U.S. Biden ministry are overprotecting Taiwan, we're in trouble. But if we said we are a country, then China will say, no, we are going to.
I don't feel like I've grappled with that because my heritage goes so back. I mean, I'm certainly very comfortably saying, I'm American, but how I feel about the way this country has processed those ideas and how this country has treated other people and the idea of other in this country has been something that's caused me a lot of pain and anguish and frustration and even anger. I just feel like as people, we can be better and do better. And part of the reason why I was always passionate about being an educator is because I feel like it starts with children and families. And if kids know more and just understand differently and have different perspectives, they're going to be more likely to proceed in a way that's different than some of these adults that we're seeing make mistake after mistake and, just repeat this process of hurt and prejudice. So yeah, I feel like that's something we have to continue to focus on. It's obviously not something that we as a country or a world have gotten past, and it needs a lot of work. It's a big part of, we do a lot of professional development here to have those conversations in classrooms with kids, because that idea that I was brought up with, which was kind of like a joke because of the Italian family, but there still was that idea of like, oh, there's certain things we don't talk about at dinners, like this, politics and religion. And it's, we've found that you end up with a huge generation of adults that don't know how to engage in productive conversations, reach compromise, or see each other's perspectives. And that's obviously a huge loss and really toxic.
So I became an American citizen in 2019 after almost 20 years after more than 20 years of living here. Around the time of my life where I had lived half of my life in France, half of it in the United States, and it took me a long time to want to become an American. I was always very proud of my French citizenship, and I still am. But at that point, first of all, I felt that we needed as many votes on a certain side as we could, and I know a lot of immigrants felt the same and decided to get their citizenship at the time to be able to vote. And second, because I felt very much part of this country. I'm connected to my wife's family. Several people in that family are also enlisted in the military, and there's a tradition of reference for the Constitution of the United States. and I love the land. I love Syracuse. I feel like this is where I will continue the rest of my life.
Sometimes because of visa issues, like at one point we didn't travel back to the UK for over 5 years because we were worried that we would get back in. I had almost like a minor panic attack on the plane. Like, will I fit in when I visit my family? Will people tease me for having an American accent? And then you go home back to my country of origin, and that's exactly what it is. Home. It's like everything is just so easy. Like everybody's humor is the same. Like it's super easy. But then when I travel back, here's my home, right? Because I've had my kids here, and so there's something about having children as well. I think that this is my home. Maybe if David and I hadn't had children and we lived here, maybe I wouldn't feel like it was my home as much, but America is definitely my home. And I have lived here, aging myself, but I have lived here close to nearly half my life. So yeah, we're getting close to that anyway. So at some point it'll be weird. At some point we'll have lived here longer than I've lived in the UK, and that will be weird.
I'm sure. Yeah. Mr. Chimney Smith talked about that too. He mentioned that it was weird when it switched.
Yeah, because I will, even though I'm American citizen, I will always see myself as a Brit first and foremost. Yeah.
Being American means that I'm free to do and say and go where I want without the fear of being, arrested or shunned by my family or being, called out in public. Of course that's going to happen, but being in America, I feel I have more of an advantage and just the opportunity to have the freedom to do what I want. And being Italian really has just more effect on my family, per se. But I feel like it's made me a kinder human being, I feel, because in my family, everyone is nice to everyone, even if you've had some complications with them in the past. Everyone loves everyone. We're a big, big family. We can't even fit in a house together. So I think just knowing that in my family we all accept each other and love each other no matter what, that's just really helped me in my everyday life with relationships and all.